Hi, it's Dwyer. GamblersAdvisory.com, a free site. BettingAngle.us, a free site. Let's talk about the gambling scandal that's taking place right now in the NBA. But first, remember, the opinion you should follow should be your own. Just consider this video to be a second opinion from a complete stranger online. Now, let me make a couple of points. First, I just watched a great gambling show. It's here on YouTube. It's Sharp or Square. Right? Chad Millman talking to Simon Hunter. That's a name you need to know. He's one of the more interesting gamblers. The two guys actually have an interesting relationship where at times they're at odds with each other. Right? The metrics they're using to handicap games, they don't agree on. So it's fascinating gambling insight and information, a diversity of approaches. Well, on today's show, and you need to look it up, Chad Millman makes the point. And Chad Millman, of course, is the same Chad Millman who pretty much built the Action Network, right? He's moved on from that. But he makes the point that prop bets are the most troublesome bets for regulators, right? Because an athlete can shade an over-under, right? Am I going to get 6.5 assists, over or under? So let's say that, I'm a Houston Rocket. I'm just picking a random example here. No truth in this. But let's say I'm a Houston Rocket. I'm dribbling around. I have 6 assists. I promised some people the under would hit. I have Kevin Durant, one of the best shooters in NBA history, a few feet away from me, wide open. Time's running off the clock. I know that if I throw it to KD, if he drains the shot, that'll be assist number 7. The over would hit, not the under that I want. So we're ahead in the game. It's not going to cost us the game. Why don't I just dribble out the ball instead? Right? Whoever I made promises to, they're happy. My under hit. My team hasn't been hurt. Who can accuse me of anything? Since we were winning the game. It's actually a decent basketball move with a lead to dribble out the ball. Right, folks? The point I want to make to you is let's not blame prop bets. Just understand that markets in general are hard to regulate. Just understand information is king. This is primarily a boxing site. Could you imagine? Let's revisit the thriller in Manila. Could you imagine if a gambler was tipped off by some insider? And understand, the range of insiders is vast. Could you imagine if someone told a gambling insider that Joe Frazier was blind in one eye, which we now know he was? He's admitted it. Right? That's why they couldn't have the first Ali Frazier fight at Jack Kent Cooke's Fabulous Forum in Los Angeles. Because Frazier, even back then, right, early 70s, Frazier wouldn't be able to pass the physical. So let's say by 75, by the thriller in Manila, let's say I've been tipped off. Let's say I'm a gambler. And I've been tipped off that Joe Frazier's blind in one eye. Now let's pretend we have today's technology back then. In other words, I'm on my phone and I am looking at live betting. In other words, the odds are changing round after round. Now the public's clueless. But let's say I know one of Frazier's eyes is blind. And let's say I'm watching that fight, and as actually happened, Ali is battering Frazier's good eye. So Joe, who's still throwing punches, who's still aggressive, who's still coming at Ali, if you have the inside information and you see Joe's one good eye closing, you understand that Joe is blind against Ali. Right, folks? You have a decided advantage. So understand on live betting, without there being any corruption by the athletes, right? Frazier's still trying to win. This fight's still personal. Ali's trying to win. Right? I could, on live betting, say, hey, Frazier's blind. He's worse off than he looks. Let me bet that this fight doesn't go the distance. Or let me take Ali. In other words, this is a fight that looks like a jump ball. Both guys look tired. But Ali has two good eyes. Joe Frazier has one, and it's busted up. So I could have bet on Ali back then. Who knows how many gamblers with access did? Gamblers with bookies they could call and say, hey player, look, I know the fight's happening right now. Give me decent odds that this fight doesn't go the distance. How does the fight end? Eddie Futch, who knew Joe was blind in one eye, protected his fighter. Right? This is the same Eddie Futch who years later would have a conversation with Freddie Roach and tell Freddie, who was popular at the time, who was on TV at the time, he told Freddie, hey, you're getting hit too much. The public doesn't fully see it. I see it. You need to walk away from the sport. I can't continue to be your trainer. Right? That Eddie Futch told Joe Frazier in a fight Joe did not want to end that he was pulling the plug in the fight because he knew that Joe was blind. Frazier himself later admitted that he was swinging at colors. Right, folks? Understand. In that world, and who would be the insider to leak that information? Right? Some doctor who came across Joe and was aware that Frazier was blind in one eye, someone who was part of the regulatory process. Understand, folks, they're fighting in Manila for a reason. They couldn't fight in California. Right? They had a hookup doctor in New York where the first two fights were. Maybe that doctor feared that he'd be discovered. Maybe he refused to sign off on the paperwork. So understand, a lot of people could have leaked the information to gamblers. Right? Someone from the medical profession. A manager. Some associate trainer. Right? Some sparring partner who may have been told, hey, don't hit Joe on his good eye. We can't risk having that eye get messed up before this fight. Right? Could even have been some associates of Joe's. Right? Let's say Joe's, out at a party or something like that. And, the person notices that Joe's peripheral vision is messed up on one side. Folks, you don't know who would leak that information. Right? Don't get me wrong. I believe sports have to police themselves. I believe authorities, because sports really do depend on the authenticity of the outcome. I think they have to, police gambling in these sports, right? But you understand the way it goes. It's impossible to police. right? So what I want people to also understand too is that it's as impossible to police as political donations. You know the way the political game really works. Let's say, hypothetically speaking, I'm a big wig in some industry. You're a politician, and you know that I've taken care of other politicians when they retire. Right? Keep in mind, many of these politicians retire, then they get, jobs at law firms. Wasn't that what Richard Nixon had for a period of time? They get jobs with some wealthy, powerful people, right? Or groups who are grateful for the legislative work they put in the abstract, right? There's a politician who, was favorable towards streaming. And then, of course, he left office and got a deal, a promotional company with a streaming Goliath, right? And the guy had no Hollywood experience, none whatsoever, right? So let's say I'm a politician. No one makes the call to me while I'm in office. You vote this way, I'll, be grateful when you leave office. Very grateful. Offering you millions of dollars. Right? There's no call. There's nothing to investigate. But yet the people in DC know who the grateful are. Right? So the bill comes up and you understand, wow, if I vote a certain way, it's going to enrich these people who might be grateful to me later. Right? You know who the donors are. Right? You know who you can count on for a fundraiser to buy tables. So there's no call, but yet, in essence, it's a bribe, isn't it? The money matters. Let's say I'm neutral on a bill. Then I'm thinking, man, if I vote this way, this group's going to be grateful, and they've given jobs to these other politicians. Why don't I ingratiate myself to them? Right? Let's talk about another problem. It's that the roles here don't have to involve the athlete being deeply involved in the gambling activity. In the 1970s, two of the best baseball players who ever lived, right? Willie Mays, 660 home runs, and Triple Crown winner Mickey Mantle got jobs with casinos. Look this up. They were casino greeters. Folks, you have a whole group of people doing this. Joe Louis did it for a casino for a period of time. Right? The rumor is that Frank Sinatra helped Joe Louis get the gig with a casino. And back then, before Howard Hughes, understand, the owners of casinos, as depicted in movies like Casino, which is supposed to be a recreation based on actual events, were, let's say, linked to or affiliated with crime families. Right? Understand you have a whole group of very successful players. Right? Mays, Mantle, Joe Louis, who of course Greek gamblers in Vegas. That's the extent of their, involvement. Right? On college campuses, as you could imagine, you have, former players, football players who, will greet donors to the university. Right? Hey, let's play a round of golf. By the way, here's a Heisman Trophy winner from our from our football team who will walk around with you. Right? Understand, the players know that all they have to do is use their name, use their presence to validate, you name the casino. Right? These players also can bring in extra money. Right? Because they know people. You have a player, he'll go nameless in this example, who of course owned a famous restaurant in town. At least that's what the public thought. Right? They were going to the restaurant named after this player. In actuality, the player just signed a deal where they were able to use his name on a restaurant run by entrepreneurs. Right? It's the same thing with gambling. So Mays and Mantle, they weren't in the back room figuring out odds or anything like that. But for the record, Bowie Kuhn, different era, the baseball commissioner banned the two guys, believe it or not. Google that story. Right? But just understand, these athletes understand that this takes almost as little work as Kawhi Leonard's endorsement deal. Right? You're Mickey Mantle. You're shaking a lot of hands. Right? This guy's a big-time gambler at a casino. You're shaking his hand. You're not tilting the game at all, but you're getting paid. Right? Let's talk about another truth of gambling. It's entertaining. I've heard too many people say, gee, I don't understand. How could Terry Rozier, with all the money he had, be involved in some gambling venture? Right, folks? Think about the best player in baseball right now. Certainly on the short list. In fact, he just won the MVP for the National League Championship Series. I won't even say his name. Just understand, that's a guy with a lot of money. He's not playing for free. Right? That's a guy with a lot of money. But yet he had an underling interfacing with a bookie on bets. Right? Now, of course, we get the story after the fact. He's suspected to have had the underling interfacing with the bookie. Folks, I don't think we'll ever hear the truth about that. Because what happened, of course, is that underling then said, no, I was embezzling. I was betting for myself. Right? There's a phrase called taking the fall. Right? I have an underling and he's interfacing with gamblers. And I know absolutely nothing about it. Do you believe that? You have another guy. One of the best ever to ever play basketball. Right? He's out on his free time. He's golfing. He's gambling. Right? He's betting, according to reports, hundreds of thousands of dollars. Right now, folks, I know there's a group out there that says, oh, he didn't need the money. Folks, rich people entertain themselves. Right? Understand. The consumer sector is dominated by wealthy people. If I'm on a golf course and some guy's talking junk and stuff like that, it's entertaining to say, hey, player, look, I'll put up this money right here. Right? You and me. Let's compare our scores at the end of this course. Right, folks? You're talking about very competitive people. There's a story. I won't name the name, but some Hall of Fame NFL quarterback had a pool table in his basement. And you know the rest. Some new guy on the team was over there, apparently was very skilled at pool. He beat this quarterback in the quarterback's house, on the quarterback's pool table. And according to reports, the quarterback would not let him leave. until the quarterback beat him. Right, folks? That's the level of competitor we're talking about. Right? Folks, you can police gambling all you want. That's not going to stop guys from saying, hey, look, man, you're talking too much smack. Let's place a bet. Now, here's the problem. In certain circles, you don't know how people got their money. Right? You have these shows on TV right now, right? Real Housewives and stuff like that, where you're looking at all these great homes and all these people who look like they have it made. And every few months, one of them gets busted for, you name it, money laundering, defrauding the public, and stuff like that. You find out that that big house was built with what prosecutors call ill-gotten gains. Right, folks? You don't know that in the moment. Right? I mean, someone invites you to a party, all you know is the neighborhood. All you know is that, there's a view of the Golden Gate Bridge or whatever. You don't really know what the person does. Let me point out, too, that people have cover stories, don't they? Right? Who was John Gotti? Wasn't he some businessman from Far Rockaway? Right? Isn't there the cover story? At what point do you become responsible for not figuring out that the cover story is a cover story? Right? So, to sum up this video, I just want people to understand that what's clear in the press, right? This guy knew he was dealing with the mob. Did he? Do you think the people who were sitting around major drug dealer Frank Lucas at the first Fraser Ali fight understood or knew that they were sitting next to one of the biggest drug dealers in Harlem at the time? Right? He's featured right now in the Godfather of Harlem series, which is excellent. Right? Just understand, Frank Sinatra couldn't get a seat for that fight. Sinatra had to have a camera on him and had to agree to take pictures for a magazine. Frank Lucas, the drug dealer, had a seat. Now, let's say you happen to be the person sitting next to Frank and his crew. You strike up some conversation. Frank just looks like a high roller. You don't know who he is. Right? You strike up some conversation and Frank says, hey, look, why don't you come by, this spot? We're going to have some poker games and stuff. And you have no idea that the poker games are sponsored by mob families or drug dealers. Right, folks? Real life is not cut and dry. Right? The major basketball player who, was gambling hundreds of thousands of dollars, and you and I know there are too many of them, but I think you know who I'm talking about. Right now, the guy he's playing with, apparently that guy was innocuous. He's just another high roller with some money, and hey, okay, I'll take your money, player. But what if the guy is not that innocent? How do you know? Right? Understand, too, whether a guy is innocent or not. How do you know in this world? You don't. Right? So, where we are with gambling and sports, and I hope they don't eliminate prop betting. Not that I bet props that much. But, where we are in gambling and sports is the same place we are in battling prostitution. Right, folks? It's, it needs to be policed. But at the same time, you're never going to erase it. Never. Some guy from Queens, a great basketball player, one of the best players ever out of Queens, New York, got a scholarship to attend UNLV. Right, so of course he comes out to the West Coast. This looks innocuous. You had a guy who, was a friend of the program, we'll call it. right? And he had, this recruit over at his place, and the recruit was photographed in the jacuzzi at this friend of the program's palatial estate, right? Of course, the friend of the program had a nickname. That nickname was the Fixer, right? There's no evidence that the recruit was in on fixing games or anything like that. In fact, he wasn't even allowed to play at UNLV. He had to transfer to a different school, where, of course, he ended up distinguishing himself in the NCAA tournament and ultimately ended up being a professional basketball player. Right? But, folks, it's that iffy. Right? I see you hanging around with this guy who's rumored to have tried to influence games at a minimum. Right? That's the rumor. Right? You're going off rumor and innuendo. How do I know the culpability of the recruit? Right? Is the guy who's trying to, or is rumored to be trying to influence games, has he actually asked for a quid pro quo from the recruit? Let's go even further. Let's say the guy never asks. Folks, real power doesn't have to. Let's say the guy never asks for the recruit to miss a basket, for the recruit to have that under 6.5 assists hit. But let's just say the guy casually mentions it, what he's bet on, to the recruit who's been at his house, who sees how this guy treats his friends. That's very important, right? If this guy's lavishing gifts, money, introductions, right? The women look gorgeous. You're thinking, man, if I'm on this guy's right side, there are all these women. Right? Why am I a basketball player? Isn't it to get closer to all these women and all this money? Right? Understand, ballers have it set up so even if you tape them, you can't say the person offered a bribe. Reputations are king. Right? Again, if I'm known as someone who, if I'm a lobbying firm, and I'm known to hire people who have pushed a certain agenda in Congress, I don't have to tell them when the vote comes up, we need for you to vote this way. I'm certainly not going to be foolish enough to tell them, in exchange for your vote, we'll give you this later. No, I just have to hook people up, treat my friends well, so that people voting on the bill I'm interested in are interested in being my friend. I might even say things like, hey, we support this position. Not you vote the way we want you to. You support, we support this position. And, we're hopeful. That by itself might be enough. So guys got busted here. From what I'm hearing, the card games are clearly crooked. I'm sure a lot of these athletes have no idea about the backgrounds of the people they're dealing with. Why would you want to? Right? The easiest secret to keep is the one you don't know. Right? There's an athlete out there right now, a former athlete, who says, look, all I did was I let someone use my mansion. Right? I don't know how he used the mansion. His poker games, I assume they were all legal. If you're smart, you have some nonsense contract that you don't plan to enforce. Understand, these contracts only become relevant if someone sues on them, and you understand when you're dealing with certain people and there's certain unknowns, you understand you're never going to sue on them. This is just for plausible deniability. You might have a contract that says, hey, look, my premises is not to be used for anything illegal. So, of course, the cops come after you because you're a former NBA player. You're the face that the people renting your house use to invite people to the poker game. Yeah, it's at this athlete's place. Right? The athlete's going to say, hey, I was just a landlord. That's just one property I own. Right? The guy signed this contract. You're not suing on the contract, right? The guy signed this contract that says he's not going to use my place for illegal activity. Right? I don't know whether or not he did. I wasn't involved in the poker game. Right? Folks, that's going to continue to happen. Right? Certain things have been with us forever. Sports betting is one of those things. Let me point out, too, the 1919 Black Sox. You know, one of the key figures in that, research it, is a guy who was a great athlete. I'm not talking about the baseball players. Right, there was a guy who was a great athlete, great boxer. Right, minor celebrity. You know, these athletes, they have their own heroes. Right? It's the boxer who played a key role in soliciting the baseball players. Right? You know how it goes. No doubt it was a slow hookup. Right? This boxer guy ingratiates himself on a personal level with these baseball players. Right? The boxer guy, no doubt, has some bling. Right? Is viewed as successful. You know, might be a ladies' man. Of course, the baseball players, some of them couldn't read. That's what we're hearing about Shoeless Joe Jackson. Right? These jocks are accustomed to hanging out with other jocks. They're accustomed to locker room culture. So, of course, you have one of the best baseball teams ever at the time. Right? And they're shading things. What do they throw? The World Series. They're good enough to get to the World Series. Right? Some might have thought, what's the big deal? We've helped this franchise by getting it to the World Series. Right? We're the reigning league champions. Our league versus who we would play in the World Series. Right? I'm sure a lot of players thought that. Right? Shoeless Joe Jackson, look at his average for the year. Right? So we lose a few games here and we get paid all this money. Right, folks? They can police it however they want. They can, say, hey, we're not going to allow prop bets. Right? As if that's ever going to happen in every sport. But they're going to say, hey, we're not going to allow these kind of bets. We'll be vigilant. What they won't be able to do is to stop it. Right? Let me close by saying, I know it's hard for people to believe, right, that guys making millions of dollars would be involved in things like this. Right? I can tell you, I've had conversations with clients. Your assumption should be that no matter how wealthy someone is, right, they might be frugal. They might value a buck. We live in a world where, according to reports, Warren Buffett, who's been a billionaire for a long time, right, who's at an age where he could get reckless with his money and still not spend half of it. Right? Warren Buffett still eats at McDonald's. As I keep telling people, too, with the Jeffrey Epstein scandal, right? Let's say you're in New York City. Let's say you hear that, there's a party taking place someplace. right? And Prince Andrew's going to be there. Woody Allen's going to be there. Alan Dershowitz is going to be there, right? You get an invite. You're in the business world. You're thinking, wow, Jeffrey Epstein, major mogul, right? Taught at the Dalton School, which is very well connected in Manhattan. You're thinking, look, he has all these very well-placed friends, right? Some people who are now billionaires went to his island, right? You go to the party. You look around. You notice a lot of attractive women, right? Here's the question. At what point are you supposed to figure out that something wrong is going on? Right? I look at a woman, I'm telling you, the older I get, the harder it is to figure out people's ages. Right? I look at a woman the same way I would walk into a club and I see good-looking waitresses and stuff like that. And I think to myself, okay, this place, is really a place that only hires gorgeous-looking women. Right? You're at the Jeffrey Epstein party and you see, these women, they're serving drinks and stuff like that. Are you supposed to know they're under 18? At what point are you supposed to know that? Let's say you see some celebrities hanging out with some of these women at the party. What's your initial reaction? Is it, wow, this guy's taking a risk with this underage woman? Or is it, this celebrity has a reputation he needs to protect? This girl must be 18. Right, folks? In the press, of course, things are cut and dry. Right? Everyone at this party must have been there for certain activity with underage women they knew were underage. I believe the reality is much more nebulous than that. Let me hear from you in the comment section of this YouTube video. Do you think that they'll be able to end gambling? Do you think, understand there's a jurisdictional problem, isn't there? You're a player, you're under the auspices of the NBA during your career. If you're out of the league and you're not on some coaching staff or on some NBA affiliated television show, right? Aren't you free to do what you want? Right? How's the NBA going to police, some figure commensurate with a Willie Mays or a Mickey Mantle? Right? If you're going to suspend them, big deal. You've had some Hall of Fame players, Pete Rose, right, who, heard he wasn't eligible for the Hall of Fame, and who, of course, thought to himself, I'm good with that. I can sign autographs and make money. 4,256 hits, people already know I belong in the Hall of Fame. Right? I'm going to pursue this path. Those are my thoughts. I look forward to yours in the comment section of this YouTube video. Thanks for stopping by.